Hi, this is Nahi. Today, I'd like to share with you a tool that I use sometimes with my clients to help them discover inner conflicts that make it really hard to change. Now, this process is not a process that I created. It was developed by Robert Kegan and Lisa Lahey, both professors at Harvard University. They wrote a book and created a program called Immunity to Change. I took their class about 5 or 6 years ago, and I believe you can still take it in online format. And they have done tons of work on adult development and what it is to help adults make changes in their behavior and continue the learning process. Now, why is that important to me? Well, as a coach, I work with people to get unstuck and to understand how they're sabotaging their goals through their belief system. And so in our accelerated growth program, we talk a lot about needs, we talk about beliefs, we talk about how you have survival beliefs and scarcity beliefs that get in the way of change. And sometimes it's useful to use a different tool that kind of gets at the same issues, but through a different lens. So that's what we're going to do today is we're going to use Robert Kegan and Lisa Lahey's Immunity to Change map and process to look at beliefs and how we get stuck just from a slightly different angle. And they have lots of resources on their own website. Their website is called Minds at Work, if you're more interested in what they do. Okay, so the bulk of their program revolves around what we call the Immunity to Change map. Immunity to Change map. Immunity to change is a phrase that comes from just the idea that it's impossible to change. When you're immune to a disease, the disease can't take hold in your body. So when you're immune to change, change can't take hold. Your body is actually resisting you changing. And that's really what happens when we resist our own change. We have things in our mind, beliefs, and things in our body that actually resist us changing. And it's not just bad habits, it goes deeper than that. So this helps you identify what those things are. So when I took the course, I did use this map several times, but I also made some slight modifications to the map. Just as you go through it, it can be very confusing. So I made some modifications. So I have a couple of different versions of the map. And I also created a worksheet that's a few pages filled with questions step by step that sort of walks you through going through this Immunity to Change map for a change that you want to make. So what I'm going to do in this video is just go through an example for you. So I did an offsite with a group of my clients a couple weeks ago, and we identified these different types of things that they wanted to make. So they wanted to, well, mine is weight loss. I don't know if anyone else had weight loss, but tons of people want to apply this to weight loss. Speaking up for what I really want, not reacting to other people that trigger me, staying focused on what matters, building confidence. So these are the types of things that, not procrastinating, things that people wanted to change. The first thing that we do is we really focus in on the goal itself. And the idea is to get the goal right. And what I mean by getting the goal right is converting it to what we call a growth goal. A growth goal is something I want to get better at. So normally when you say you want to lose weight, you're thinking, well, I want to make this certain thing happen. I want to lose 40 pounds by such and such a date. But that has nothing to do with your behavior or your skills. So your growth goal is, what do I want to improve or get better at that will make it easier for me to lose that weight or achieve that goal? So in this case, for weight loss, I put, I'm committed to getting better at resisting cravings for junk food, because I believe that that's an important part of my own weight loss journey, is getting more attached to healthy foods and less attached to junk food. For the other things that we listed, the person that wanted to speak up, we came up with, I'm committed to getting better at articulating my opinion in meetings or in personal conversations. The person that didn't want to be triggered, I'm committed to getting better at staying calm and patient when others push my buttons. So I'm committed to getting better at. This keeps it in growth mode. It keeps it focused on something that you actually can control and improve in yourself, which actually gives you more power over succeeding at the goal. The people who wanted to stay focused, not procrastinate, not get distracted, I'm committed to getting better at staying focused on what matters when I'm distracted or interrupted. I'm committed to getting better at feeling confident in high pressure situations. So I'm going to go over the process with you at a pretty high level right now. You can go into great detail using the map and the worksheet. So the first thing that we do, and I'll actually show you what this looks like on the map because that might make it easier. So both maps, we start with kind of what is your goal and why is your goal important? And here we have actions to achieve my goal here and behaviors that work against my goal here. In my worksheet, I made it a little bit different. Here's a lot of stuff about your goals so that you can get really clear on your goal first. And then we have 2 columns, actions to achieve my goal and what I do instead. So those are the 2 main questions that you ask. It's almost a 3-phase process. First, you really get clear on the goal. Second, you compare the actions that you quote unquote should be doing if you really are committed to your goal. But what you're actually doing, and you get really honest and you compare those. Then we kind of look into your resistance, and actually, I lied. It's not just 3 steps because we look into your resistance, then we look into the underlying assumptions, and then we actually take some action to help you change these assumptions. So the first part, which is what are the actions I quote unquote should be taking and what am I doing instead? Well, I would not have junk food in the house. That would be helpful. If I'm committed to not having, getting better at resisting cravings. If I don't have junk food in the house, it'll be easier for me to resist the cravings and I'll get a lot more practice because I'm too lazy to go out to the store and buy the junk food. When I feel a craving for junk food, I try to distract myself with something else. I think that's a great action I could be taking. At meal times, I'd choose something healthy instead of choosing something with junk food in it. And I'd also maybe practice not eating anything after 7. That might not have anything directly related to junk food, but maybe I normally have my junk food at 7. Like I always want to have ice cream before I go to bed or cookies or some kind of dessert thing. Okay, but what do I really do? Well, what I really do is I keep junk food in the house just in case I need it. And when I feel a craving for junk food, what happens is these little voices come up in my head kind of quickly and they say, oh, you shouldn't have that. And I slam the door shut on those voices very quickly. I just refuse to listen to them. I shut off all my thinking and I stubbornly go grab what I want without having any thoughts at all. And at meal times, when I think about making healthy choices, I actually start feeling really bored and deprived and whiny, like, oh, I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't want that. What would actually taste good? And another thing is, I may say that it's a good idea to stop eating in the evenings, but I always tell myself I'll do it tomorrow instead of today. I deserve to relax and enjoy myself tonight. So there's my compare contrast. And you can have really long lists and they don't necessarily have to correspond to each other one-on-one, one-to-one like I did here. It's just, it's an easier way to do an example this way. Okay, so now once you've sort of looked at the actions, then what you have to do is imagine. And so now you have to really get into the feeling. And I'm going back to this because you have to literally look at these behaviors and you have to imagine yourself doing all these behaviors and or not doing these behaviors. Okay, so giving up all these behaviors and doing all these behaviors instead. And when you think about that, what comes up? And it was so funny because one of the people in my group said, oh yeah, right, that's happening. And I think it's funny because that's kind of what we all say. We're like, oh yeah, I already know already that I'm going to resist this. But what you have to do now in order to get any insight is really get into that resistance. What is it that I'm resisting? So when you imagine not doing this or not doing this, so doing all these actions that you quote unquote should be doing, you imagine doing them, or you imagine giving up the actions that you're doing instead, you should have some kind of emotional response. And it should be a really ucky, gross, horrible emotional response. And that is what you're looking for. So some of the questions that I ask when you try to get into that state is go really deep, close your eyes, really try to describe the emotion. And so when I did that, because my first reaction would be, I don't feel anything. I shut down the thoughts and I just go eat and I enjoy my junk food. And it could be a big plate of nachos. And I don't start feeling bad until a while after I've eaten those nachos. But it's almost like I'm rebelling and nothing's going to stop me, or my cookies or whatever it is. But if I force myself to think about either doing the behaviors that I should do, or not doing the behaviors that I'm doing, kind of giving up the behaviors that I've been doing, I get a feeling of deep rage that I have to do that, and also a feeling of despair. And I thought that was really interesting. Like, I was never connected to those feelings before. So that's kind of one big insight you can get from this. All right. Then once you've identified the feelings, what are the words of the resistance? And you might not get them exactly. So I put the words of the rage, or something like, nobody's going to tell me what I can and can't eat. People are so judgy about food these days. And, I deserve to have some joy in my life, and I should be able to do what I want, not what other people think I should do. So lots of rage and anger around that, what I used to call my little internal rebel. And then the words of the despair are something like, gosh, if I have to live my life without my comfort foods, I'll be alone and I'll be miserable. It would just be horrible. Like I would be really missing something that provides me kind of my only joy in life. I thought, wow, that's kind of intense. So you might run into some intense feelings here and just some intense insights to correspond to those feelings. But this is good stuff. This is the stuff that will make a huge difference. Because then what you realize is this resistance has a commitment associated with it as well. So what's my commitment here? Well, of course, I don't want these horrible things to happen. I don't want to be all alone and miserable. And, I don't want other people running my life. So what I'm committed to is doing and choosing what I want and what brings me joy, not what other people think I should do. I'm committed to not being alone and miserable. So what you want to do is write a competing commitment that reflects this resistance. Usually what you're trying to do is commit to something that will help you not have to feel these horribly bad feelings and not have to deal with whatever words are associated with those feelings. So that's what the competing commitment is, kind of to protect you from this. All right, so then you get to compare your competing commitment with your original self-improvement goal. And if you've done this well, what you'll find is when you read these two commitments and you notice that you're committed to both of them, you realize all of a sudden that you're stuck between a rock and a hard place because you can't do both. So I'm committed to getting better at resisting cravings for junk food. I'm committed to doing and choosing what I want and what brings me joy, not what other people think I should do. Now, this is interesting. As I read this from a very objective place, I can tell you that most people would not see these as competing commitments. I mean, junk food might not have anything to do with their autonomy or their joy. But for me, I can see very clearly that these are competing commitments, because to me, junk food has something to do with my autonomy and my joy. So for me, these are clearly competing and clearly explaining why I sabotage myself every time I try to resist junk food. All right, so once you've identified that and you really clearly see how you're stuck like that inside, then you get to, well, what are the assumptions behind this? All right. So you go back to all this ucky stuff, the feelings of the resistance, the words of the resistance. And you say, well, what are the assumptions behind this? And if you look at what I wrote, other people are going to ruin my life and run my life and tell me what to do all the time. And that's going to be horrible. And if I don't eat junk food, I'm going to be alone and miserable. So there's something about joy in here, the assumptions that I wrote, and I'm sure there's probably more here, but healthy food is boring and miserable. Junk food is the only kind of food that is tasty and joyful. Someone is twisting my arm and judging what I eat. People are always judging me by what I eat or by my weight, and I have to push back to assert my autonomy. I can't enjoy a long period of time without junk food as a crutch, so this is a capability belief. Junk food is a necessary component of joy for me. So here are some assumptions. Once you've written your list of assumptions, the next thing to do is to begin to test the assumptions, but you can only pick one assumption. So I chose to pick junk food is a necessary component of joy for me. And the reason I chose to pick that is I realized that one seemed to be more related to everything in my worry box than the others. So what we do is we create what they call a safe experiment. A safe experiment means that you don't put yourself at risk. So for example, if you believe that if you speak up, you're going to get fired, it wouldn't be safe to speak up because you might get fired. Your assumptions might be true and you don't want to get fired. So you might want to do something that's related to speaking up, but maybe not as violently or not as big. So for example, for me with the junk food thing, trying to tell myself I'm not going to eat junk food anymore. Well, that's just not something that I'm going to buy. My resistance is going to kick in and I won't do it. And I know I won't do it. So, but safe means not depriving myself completely of junk food. So in my case, but if someone said, if I make mistakes, I'll be so embarrassed. People will think I'm stupid. Safe would be not putting themselves in a situation where they're on purpose making big mistakes, right? So that's what safe means. You don't necessarily try to topple your whole paradigm, but what you do try to do is find out some more information in a not so risky way, something that you'd actually be willing to do. So in this case, I'm not willing to deprive myself of junk food, but what I am willing to do is to pay attention to joy and try to understand what our experience of joy that don't involve junk food. So maybe I don't feel like I can only get my joy from junk food. So your safe experiment is usually a 2-week experiment where you're doing a lot of self-observations. And here are some of the self-observations that I had during my 2 weeks. I got immersed in my work for an entire afternoon and completely forgot about eating. And that's happened several times when I've gotten into flow mode with my own work. I was able to make a very healthy chopped salad that tasted wonderful and felt indulgent. So that gave me hope that I can come up with some very healthy meals that I really enjoy and feel really tasty to me that aren't necessarily junk food, but I still have that exquisite experience with. I don't always enjoy the junk food I eat. So maybe I'll grab pizza or potato chips or whatever, but maybe they're not as enjoyable. Maybe they're just habitual. They're not always enjoyable. I just sometimes do it out of habit. When are some other times that I feel joyful? Well, I feel joyful when I laugh with my family and friends. I feel joyful when I sit in the jacuzzi after a swim workout. And then one thing I notice is that taste seems to be a very big part of joy for me. And so after my 2 weeks, often what you'll do is you'll cycle through it again. You'll go through the immunity to change map. You'll now integrate your observations into your thinking. You'll pick another assumption. You'll do another 2-week test, and you'll kind of cycle through this. And slowly over months, you'll start noticing things loosening up and not as much resistance if you start changing some of your assumptions. Well, the big assumption that I have been changing is that junk food isn't my only source of joy, that I can feel joy in many other ways, and that I can still eat junk food sometimes, but I don't have to eat it so much that it hurts me. So, and then my autonomy also doesn't necessarily mean blindly rebelling against other people, but that was another experiment. So we'll go into that later. But there are a lot of experiments that you do. And this is the experiential part of learning that is absolutely required when it comes to changing your beliefs. So my follow-up is to really focus on taste and to try to come up with some healthy meals that taste great to me, that are easy to make, and see how many of those I can integrate and see if I can get myself kind of more attached to those things and less attached to junk food. So that's my next step. So for people who have been working with me, you'll maybe recognize this model, because this is the model that I use with my clients to talk about how we get in our own way. So how is immunity to change connecting to our own accelerated growth model? Well, in the immunity to change system, the behaviors that work against my goal are probably part of your survival strategy. So you should notice some correlations there, okay? And your worry box and your big assumptions, those probably correlate with your survival beliefs and possibly get at your scarcity beliefs. So I'm not going to go into this model in this video because that's not what this video is about, but just to let you know that the reason I do immunity to change with my clients is just to give them another angle in, because sometimes it gets boring using the same model over and over again. And there are 2 or 3 other organizations besides mine that are doing this type of work, helping people get unstuck and just going at it from different angles. And I feel like as many angles as you can get at it from, the faster your change will be. So I hope you enjoyed this. Good luck, have fun. And if you have any questions, as usual, don't hesitate to reach out.